Hello, welcome. My name is James White. I am the head of enterprise here at Cosine, and today is very exciting because we have one of our very first and one of our most enthusiastic and frequent users of Cosine today, Dr. Cristopher Flagg, who is here to talk to us about all that he does and his views on Cosine and what it works for and why he uses it. So hello, Chris. Thank you so much for being with us. It's very kind of you to give us some time today. Can you just start by briefly introducing yourself? Give us a summary of what do you do in the week and what do you use Cosine for?
Hi, my name is Dr. Cristopher Flagg. I help clients analyze and develop multi-agent systems that focus on conversational AI. How I came to find Cosine is that I've been working with a lot of clients who are integrating AI into their back-end systems and have been looking for coding agents to help facilitate that process.
Amazing. And what specific problem led you to try Cosine in the first instance? Was there something specific you were looking for?
Yes, one of the things that we were looking for initially in adoption of Cosine was to help engineering teams onboard to AI coding agents. We were working with a client who had a particularly tight deadline and weren't sure if it would be better to wait until after the deadline hit or integrate a coding agent in the middle of the project. We were able to train the development staff on Cosine, integrate it into their process, and meet the deadline, beat the deadline, and integrate the coding agent into the final results. It was a really fantastic process. It went very smoothly. The developers were able to use the system because it was designed to fit into a normal developer workflow.
Perfect. Great. So maybe first of all, let's talk a little bit about how you use Cosine. How do you use it day to day? What does that look like? And what other elements of your workflow do you relate it to?
Cosine is like coding parkour. I integrate it into everything I do when I'm coding. I spend about a third of my time discussing the design and my implementation with Cosine back and forth in the chat. This includes testing and acceptance criteria. Once I have a good handle on what my overall design is going to be, I have Cosine save that and then work from that for future steps. Cosine actually does the division of the overall implementation plan into phases. And then I walk through each phase with Cosine. And surprisingly, the coding time is the least amount of time I spend working with the engine, making sure that everything is understood. And then once the coding is done, that all the acceptance criteria is met, is where I spend a lot of my time. Merging in PR, then move on to the next phase. It's a very smooth process.
What other tools do you use? So do you integrate with GitHub? Do you use other AI developer tools as well alongside it?
Yeah, I've tried most of the coding agents out there. I work heavily with GitHub. I'm currently doing a lot of work with AWS and Bedrock, and Cosine is able to integrate and handle all of that development. I was actually stunned at the ability Cosine had to develop AWS infrastructure. It was very effective.
Okay, great. Could you pick one or two examples of specific concrete tasks that you've asked Cosine to do and what that looked like and what the impact was?
One of the first concrete tasks that I had Cosine tackle was developing an Android app. I've done a lot of work in the ML area. I've designed a lot of neural network systems, and I had never done an Android app before. So I tasked Cosine with designing and developing it. We came up with a plan. We worked through the various phases and were able to actually create an app that was releasable on the Google Play Store. It was a proof of concept, and Cosine did a fantastic job at not only working with the errors in the log, but developing and adding new features as the system progressed.
And what did that look like? How long did that take you end to end? How many requests did you have to give Cosine?
Working end to end, it honestly only took me 2 weeks, and that was with a lot of intermittent tasks on other projects. As far as how many tasks I worked with Cosine, I don't really know. My development process with Cosine has been to work on a feature by feature basis, or a phase by phase basis. And as such, that application had around 12 different phases during development. But I know that I probably used 20, maybe 30 tasks, some to solve specific bugs within a phase, others to explore different possibilities and do some rapid prototyping and A/B testing on different features. One of the nice things about Cosine, since it works out of PRs, is that you can create a branch for each feature that you're working on or trying out, and then A/B test across all of the different implementations to see which one you like. Once you've found a testing set or a feature that works the way you want it to work, you merge that one in, and now you've got the ability to develop 10 different versions of a feature and see which one works best.
That's great. And you mentioned it took you maybe end to end about 2 weeks. Obviously, you weren't focused on that full time, but that was the length of time it took. What's your best guess if you were go back 10 years? How long do you think it would have taken you roughly to do that work then?
I honestly couldn't tell you. I've tried several Android apps in the past and have found the concept daunting. It's an entirely different engineering process than doing something on AWS. And so learning the intricacies of how the Android app and Swift apps work is very difficult. I will say that on the Amazon side, I was earlier this spring working on a project for a back-end system, and it took me 2 months to develop, implement, and test. Over the summer, I was able to design and develop an equivalent system with Cosine in 2 weeks. So that was a huge savings in time and effort.
Wow, that's great. Actually, let's jump into that. Maybe could you talk us through that process in a bit more detail? So what exactly were you doing? What was your code base and your infrastructure looking like, and what did you want to achieve, and how did you use Cosine for that?
Well, one of the most interesting projects I've been working on recently is conversational AI. And so the first step was to develop a conversational engine that would generate responses based on personality. And this was done by hand in the spring, and it took me about 2 months. And this was integration of step functions and Bedrock and the user authorization, all of the lambdas, everything that goes into a standard AWS stack. So that was developed. The next task was to create a middleware system that would connect to the client to provide the actual chat. And the middleware system and the backend system were both stateless. So developing this middleware system has taken about 2 weeks. And Cosine has actually been able to develop and deploy the full SAM stack, integrate with GitHub so that the deployments are automatic, and work through both development and production environments. It has been an invaluable tool. I would not have been able to program as much with as much complexity and as much rigor as I have with Cosine. One of the nice things about Cosine is that you can have it develop your testing suite and double check against your acceptance criteria while you're developing any particular phase. And so when I reach the end of a phase with Cosine, I am convinced that it has met the specification.
And you said that took you with Cosine around 2 weeks to do. Is that right? That migration. What would that have looked like previously? What would you have been doing? Would it have been working directly in GitHub to do this instead, or other tools?
It would have been working with GitHub and IDE, maybe using Conduit to bring in another coding agent to do small snippets of code. But mostly it would have been the standard developer workflow. Take some code, commit several, do a pull request, merge it into the base. And so with Cosine, a lot of the standard developer tools are built in so that it follows the same workflow. Integrating it into what I was doing was very easy. And the project would have taken around the same scope, so around 2 months to complete. They're very similar in their requirements. And so Cosine's help in developing that software stack was invaluable.
Wonderful. Now, maybe let's talk about other solutions in the market, because we know that there are lots of, this is a very fast moving space. AI is becoming more and more capable, and inevitably there are lots of tools in the market offering developers with AI embedded solutions. So what do you think Cosine does differently from the tools and the other code assistants that you've worked with? Why did you choose to spend a lot of your time with Cosine? And it's fine, maybe do you use it in partnership with other AI tools as well, but how does that partnership work?
One of the nice things about Cosine is that it's designed to work as a developer. It follows the same flow, the same standard methodologies that a programmer would follow. And so what you end up with is something that integrates into the process and is unobtrusive. A lot of the coding agents that are out there now are focused on replacing the coder, so that people with no coding skill can go in and achieve some really interesting results. Cosine has the advantage that it is designed with the programmer in mind rather than replacing the programmer. And so working with Cosine, I'm able to follow my normal development process, only I'm able to iterate much faster. Other tools that are out there that provide coding and coding insight really are focused at replacing the developer.
Great. Let's maybe talk about results now. How do you think about measuring the impact of Cosine or other tools on your workflows? What metrics do you look at and track, and what would your best estimate be in terms of how those metrics have improved thanks to you using Cosine?
As far as metrics and impact, because I'm doing a lot of contracting work, most of what I'm working on is very tight turnaround, fixed budget, small development teams. And so the traditional methods of measuring development velocity, taking down trouble tickets, looking at the number of commits or number of lines of code generated, simply don't apply. It's fascinating to work with Cosine and move to a level that's beyond those standard metrics. So the amount of code that's generated or the velocity of code development is measured at a very high level on what different phases and what different features we've been able to implement, rather than looking at the lower level amount of code that's generated. The code is still reviewed. Developers are still involved in understanding what the system is doing, but they're no longer constrained with this idea of what standard productivity is and what is expected of a developer as far as lines of code per hour, number of issues knocked out, number of story points addressed. Cosine really does take development to a level that's beyond some of these lower level metrics. You can still use them. They're still measurable. You can still integrate these metrics into your overall management process. But with Cosine, they're not as big of an indicator of the velocity of the overall project.
Okay, great, thanks. Let's briefly talk about results. What, in terms of the hard numbers, what measurable impact have you seen from using Cosine, and how do you track that and think about that?
One of the projects my team was recently working on was to design, implement, test, and deploy a project that was scoped out at 2 months. This was a back-end AWS-based project. The team using Cosine was able to complete that project in just 2 weeks. And that with all of the testing, all of the acceptance criteria, and all of the formal process. So the team was able to take a project that was scoped at 2 months and complete it in 2 weeks. My junior developers, who are now using Cosine, have been able to iterate 10 times faster on implementing new features than they were before. One of the best things about Cosine is its ability to generate very solid testing and testing criteria. We've increased our testing velocity by 5 times using Cosine and identified more bugs than we were able to before. One of the teams that I've been working with was able to move a mature 2 million line code base to AWS using Cosine in just 2 weeks. Our A/B testing has increased 5 times, allowing us to test all proposed features instead of just looking at the most promising features.
That's great. Are there other things that Cosine has surprised you about in a good way, that tasks that you weren't expecting it to be able to do, but it's managed to do?
That is a very good question. What I've been most surprised by Cosine is its ability to work in areas that are really outside of what you consider standard coding. And so in the first case, I've been able to use Cosine to go and do research on various different implementations. So given any particular task, I can have Cosine go and research 3 different methods for achieving that task. Give me the pros and cons, and then add that to the implementation plan. One of the most interesting things that we've discovered during the course of using Cosine is that it can conduct pure research. One of my projects as a graduate student was dealing with massive data sets on gait and neurodegenerative diseases. And so in this project, we spent a lot of time researching all of the different data that we could pull together from existing data sets to develop this project. Cosine was able to go out, review data sets on something that it wasn't trained on, make valid recommendations, and even characterize the type of data that was included in those data sets. If I had used this tool in graduate school, I would have been able to conduct research much faster and much more thoroughly, just because of the time it saved. Then, once it was able to identify the proper data sets, and these are from PhysioNet and things that I know are outside of the standard training protocols, it was able to identify and then write me code in R that would not only load these data sets, but visualize the data sets and give me an idea of what the balance of the data in those data sets were. These are things that, again, would have taken weeks during graduate school, but Cosine was able to achieve in an afternoon.
What's your Cosine playbook that you deploy and that you think others should try?
One of the things that I rely heavily on with Cosine is documentation. It really is fantastic in a conversational setting, which I have a lot of background in, at pulling together data from different areas, synthesizing data, and making solid recommendations. What I will typically do is research a particular task or goal, and then I'll have Cosine save that to a document. That way, in the repository, that knowledge is saved. One of the most interesting things about Cosine is that it works on an entire repository at a time, as opposed to individual files that you may direct your coding agent at. A lot of coding agents are focused on working with just the information you provide. With Cosine, I can say, let's work on this feature that we discussed. It will actually go through the database, go through GitHub, and pull up that previous conversation, load it into context, determine what's relevant in the conversation, and then work from there. And so what will typically happen is all of my different features will end up with different data files. And then those features will be pulled together into an implementation plan. The really nice thing about it is that it provides artifacts for both Cosine and the developer to work with later on in the process. One of the most difficult things that I've found, especially as teams are focused on rapid development and rapid deployment, is building up that knowledge of the infrastructure, the knowledge of the goals, and the understanding of how these particular decisions in your system have been made. By having Cosine save all of its inquiries and research into these files, it then has that knowledge later on, and it's really surprising. I've had tasks where I'm halfway through the development process, I've asked it a question, and it's come back and said, in stage 1 of the process, we talked about this, and there was a file that mentions these 2 other factors. If we'd like to go with this new implementation, it makes changes to those. Would you like me to go back and update the documentation? It's truly fascinating how Cosine works with the large corpus of files. And this is on a GitHub repository that has, at the moment, well over 300,000 lines of code. And that's in addition to all of the various document files I've had Cosine develop.
Wow, excellent, great. And we know that a lot of value in AI across lots of different spaces depends on how we interact with it. So what are the quality of our prompts? How specific are they? Are they focused and clear? What are your top tips on that front for how to get the most out of Cosine in terms of what you ask it?
Treat Cosine as a conversation. A lot of coding agents really are focused on developing the perfect prompt and then having that prompt be executed. With Cosine, because it is solidly conversational, you can have discussions about what you're looking for. So you give it a sample prompt and ask it what options it has, what additional information it would need, and where it sees issues. And it will actually give you results on where it needs clarification. By iterating over this process, you eliminate the need for a perfect prompt, and you actually work with Cosine to develop something both you understand and it understands. So when you write that documentation, it's well thought out, well understood by the developer as well as Cosine. And so don't be so focused on the perfect prompt, and use the conversation to build up that context of what it is you like, what you don't like, what you want, what issues you see, what your corner cases are, and Cosine will integrate all of that into its development plan.
That was great advice and ties so clearly to the way that we like to think about how we charge for Cosine as well, in the sense that we define each interaction with Cosine in terms of tasks, and your account will allow you a certain number of tasks each month. But in each task, you can go back and forth and have conversations, ask follow-ups, query things, direct it in the right direction. And that is at no additional cost to the end user for exactly the reasons you say. We don't want to encourage all of our users to think really precisely at the beginning that they need to curate the perfect prompt before they start. Actually, they can start pretty broad, ask for Cosine's perspectives on different avenues to follow, and then steer together to get to the best outcome, because that's really actually how you use these AI tools most effectively. So that's great advice. Thank you for that. Let's talk a little bit about maybe some specific industry angles. You mentioned before that you work heavily, of course, in the education space. What use cases do you see there for Cosine?
A lot of people who program in R because it's the best tool out there, not because they love programming. And we've been experimenting recently with a cohort of interns on using Cosine to accelerate the academic process. And so we're working with students at Georgetown University to integrate Cosine into non-computer science and non-developer type areas. And so what we have them do is use Cosine to research data sets, understand data sets, integrate and develop functions in R, and really take Cosine outside of the computer science and more specifically developer focus into a broader scientific area. And so we have been able to really integrate this in several cases. We have one student who's working on drone technology who was able to use Cosine to do all of the background research for an executive summary on the use of drones in a particular application. Zero coding was done during this, but he was able to take Cosine, ask specific questions like who are the major players in this area, build up that backend knowledge base of files on what the different responses and different focuses were, and then combine that into, honestly, a very high quality executive summary. It was fantastic, and it was using Cosine for pure research and no development. We have another student who is working in bioinformatics and is currently overwhelmed by the amount of data she has to consume. And she is an adept R programmer, so she has no problem with R, but it really is such a massive amount of data that having R wrangle it properly has been a challenge. And so we've been working with her on Cosine to help manage the data, understand and characterize the data, and really work with more data than she was able to without Cosine's help. And so that project is ongoing, and I'll be posting a lot about that in the near future. But these out of bounds and general research applications of Cosine have been frankly stunning. And I attribute it all to Cosine's use of their product manager. Under the hood, there is a coordination that happens beyond the standard coding tool. You're seeing coding tools start to integrate, do I want to build now or do I want to plan? In this case, Cosine, from inception, has had this ability built in. And so researching, understanding a problem, pulling outside sources, and working with this data is native to Cosine. The fact that there are tasks that don't involve any coding whatsoever, they're purely conversational, really highlights this difference in the AI coding agents. And with Cosine, the ability to discuss something without creating any code, without the end goal of creating code, is absolutely fascinating.
That's great, and great to hear. We've built out, as you know, of course, a separate chat function from all of the individual tasks. So hopefully it's really easy for people to have those conversations, even outside, as you say, the context of a specific branch of your repo, but more to brainstorm together, try and identify different routes or angles, or even just have a wider understanding completely unrelated to code. And then eventually to fold that in to some of the work that you're doing as a developer as well is a really great thing to do. Wonderful. Now, finally, you've been far too positive so far. We want to be balanced on this, and we know that Cosine is definitely not perfect. It's still a work in progress. It's only been up and running really for a few months. What are the elements that you'd love to see fixed, improved? What are the next features that you really want us to see develop next?
This was a really hard question because I am still trying to find the depths and the boundaries of Cosine. And to be honest, I really haven't. So far, there have been nothing but pleasant surprises around every corner. So that has been excellent. One of the things that I'm working on heavily right now is Amazon and AWS development, and the ability to use some sort of outside tool or integrate with some sort of outside logging would be fantastic. Right now, my options are either to download the log and attach it to a particular response, or to add the log to the repositories that's there for a longer term review. But really going out and being able to pull out CloudWatch, being able to look at the contents of an S3 bucket, being able to interrogate outside systems would really help the debugging flow. An example would be integration into Chrome. A lot of the work I've been doing is browser-based as well, and being able to get into the Chrome console and see what sort of outputs are being generated. Being able to look at the output of an additional system, looking at R's error logs as they're developed would be really interesting hooks. And it would give Cosine the ability to do deeper research into errors that are coming up. There's systems out there that are able to read their own logs and integrate that, and having Cosine be able to look at what's happening would be absolutely fantastic. And I know that's something that is probably easier to do with the command line version of Cosine, but for most of my workflows, I have been browser-based for the advantages of the conversational setup. So integration with external tools, even if it's just read-only log identification, would be fantastic. The second point would be greater visibility into the actual status of running jobs. So there are times when Cosine is thinking, and it's unclear whether Cosine is actually thinking or Cosine has stopped. And it's a standard halting problem. You can't have Cosine tell whether or not Cosine is hung. So the ability to get into a dashboard and see, here are my running projects, here are my running tasks, just a high-level overview of what's currently going on in my account would be really nice. And then on top of that, the ability to modify jobs, stop jobs, or continue jobs. Something similar to what happens in Jupyter Notebooks, where you can control the underlying behavior of the kernel while you're going through and executing different statements.
Those are excellent suggestions, and hopefully thanks to Cosine as well, it's much easier these days to build out new features or fix some of these changes than it used to be. So as a thank you for speaking to me, we'll make sure that these are high up on the list of our next few weeks. Chris, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you. I really appreciate your time, and great to hear about all of the ways in which you are using Cosine. If anyone is listening to this or watching this and has thoughts, would like to be in one of these videos, share their feedback as well, then please do reach out to me. I'm available at james.white@cosine.sh, and I'd love to speak to you. Thanks, Chris. Take care.
Thank you, and thanks for developing a fantastic product.